Just going to test this out. I'll be reading from Black and Slave by David M. Goldenberg. Introduction. This book attempts to reconstruct a history of the Curse of Ham, uncovering its origins and following its trend and spread throughout history. In the biblical book of Genesis, a drunken Noah accidentally exposed himself. His son Ham sinfully looked at him. And as punishment, Noah cursed Ham's son with servitude. Quote, "A servant of servants he shall be with his brothers." End quote. Over time, this story was understood to say that black skin was part of the curse. The idea that blackness and slavery are inescapably joined, and that the Bible thus consigned blacks to an everlasting servitude, had its most notorious manifestation into antebellum America, where it provided biblical validation for sustaining the slave system. But the addition of blackness to Noah's curse of slavery did not begin in America. The curse of Ham has a long and involved history. In this book, I attempt to unravel that history, to trace the development of the curse and follow its course over time and space. The Bible says nothing about the skin color in the story of Noah. But this feature was somehow woven into the biblical text. In recent years, several scholars, myself included, have attempted to explain how this devastating and patently false interpretation came about. In a work I wrote some years ago, I sought to uncover how the curse of Ham came to be by examining how blacks were portrayed in the Bible, and how those biblical texts were interpreted over the centuries by the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim writers. I examined how early views of race, color, slavery, and the related meanings assigned to the name of Ham were incorporated into perceptions of the black African, eventuating in the strange interpretation of Noah's curse. Exegesis does not occur in any historical vacuum, and it is no wonder that the curse of Ham came into being to justify the phenomenon of black slavery. But historical forces and exegetical manipulation were not the only causes. There is a prior history to the curse of Ham. In this work, I show how the curse and etiology of black slavery evolved out of an earlier etiology explaining the existence of dark-skinned people. I was led to this line of investigation when I realized that many contemporary scholars confused and combined the two separate origins stories, the one of black skin and the other of black slavery. In the first part of this book, by means of a close reading of the primary sources, I unravel the separate exegetical and interpretative strands of the Noah story, uncovering their beginnings in the Near East and their reception and dispersion in Europe and America. I explain when, where, why, and how an original mythic tale of black origins morphed into a story of the origins of black slavery, and how, in turn, the second then supplanted the first as an explanation for black skin. As we follow this process, we shall see how formulations and applications of the curse changed over time, depending on the historical and social context, reflecting and refashioning the way blackness and blacks were perceived in particular. We will discover two significant developments. First, the curse of slavery, which was originally said to affect various dark-skinned peoples, was eventually applied more commonly to black Africans. Second, blackness, which was originally incidental to the curse, in time became part of the curse itself. In the second half of the book, I examine how and when the curse spread to Europe. David once commented how there is little study of the transmission of racist ideas to Europe. He considered the Portuguese royal chronicler Gomes Ones de Zurara, 15th century, as the first in Europe to mention the curse of Ham. This is a common view followed by many investigating the subject. In this work, I show, however, that the transmission of the curse to Europe began well before Zurara, and it continued long after. Long afterward, yeah. I engage in this work with much trepidation and humility, for I venture outside the field of Jewish history and beyond the 8th century. The areas and times of my formal historical training. I can make no claim to the thoroughness in discovering all relevant primary sources. Undoubtedly, there are more materials dealing with a curse of blackness or a curse of black slavery which have not found their way into later historical studies, and of which I was not therefore aware. And of course, this is all the more true for material still in manuscript in various libraries throughout the world. Nevertheless, I believe that I have sufficiently mined the available resources on the basis of which I can make the argument for this book. Definitions and clarifications. This book deals with what is properly but confusingly known as the Curse of Ham. It is confusing because it can have different meanings. Further confounding matters is that two other related terms, the Hamitic hypothesis and the myth of Ham, can also have different meanings. And in modern studies, all three terms are often used as synonyms for one another. The Hamitic hypothesis properly refers to the now discredited theory of physical anthropology that any civilizing tendencies, cultural advances, or technological improvements found in Black Africa derived from a non-Black people known as the Hamites, or a subgroup, it was believed, of the Caucasian race who came from outside Africa. Perhaps the most quoted statement of this theory is that by the anthropologist C.J. Seligman, who wrote in 1930, quote, "The history of Africa south of the Sahara is no more than a story of the permeation through the ages, in different degrees and at various times, of the Negroes and the Bushmen by Hamitic blood and culture." The Hamites were, in fact, the great civilizing force of Black Africa, end quote. In this book, Black Folk Then and Now, W.E. Du Bois countered this hypothesis, which he described succinctly, quote, "Africa had no history. Wherever there was history in Africa or civilization, it was of white origin, and the fact it was civilization proved it was white," end quote. The myth of Ham has been used to mean almost anything. In the myth of Ham in the 19th century, American Christianity, Sylvester Johnson employed the term to mean the belief that blacks descended from biblical Ham, the son of Noah. Others use the term as synonymous with the curse of Ham. St. Clair Drake used it to refer to the Hamitic hypothesis. This study will not be concerned with the Hamitic hypothesis, nor, for purposes of clarity, will I use the term myth of Ham. The curse of Ham is sometimes used broadly in modern writings to designate a punishment whether or not a curse is invoked. Of black skin imposed on Ham without any relationship to slavery. This is not how the term is used in this study. The curse of Ham, as used here, refers to the belief based on the story of Noah's cursing in Genesis 9. Blacks have been afflicted with eternal servitude, in other words, the divine sanctioned combination of black skin and slavery. This belief comes in various forms. It may assume that although the Bible restricts the curse of slavery to Canaan, his father Ham was included in the curse. That Ham is the ancestor of blacks or that Canaan is the all dark skin, is that of Canaan is that all dark skinned peoples were affected by just black. Oh, sorry about this. This belief comes in various forms. It may assume that although the Bible restricts the curse of slavery to Canaan, his father Ham was included in the curse. That Ham is the ancestor of blacks, or that Canaan is, that all dark-skinned peoples are affected by just black Africans were, that blackness began with the curse, or that the one cursed was already black, that Noah issued two curses, one of slavery and one of black skin. Of that black skin was a consequence, or that black skin was a consequence of the curse of slavery. The one constant is that based on the biblical story, blacks have been cursed with servitude for all time. In this study, I use the term curse of Ham without distinguishing these various forms of the curse, with one important exception. Since I attempt to explain how blackness and servitude were combined in interpreting the biblical narrative, it is important to determine whether blackness was believed to have its origin together with the biblical curse of slavery, or whether the one cursed with slavery was black before the curse was imposed. If Ham / Canaan was perceived to have been black before the incident of Noah's drunkenness, the subsequent curse cannot be seen as an etiology of dark skin. A crucial aspect of this study is the distinction between the two etiologies of blackness and slavery, and the consequent combination of the two. For the sake of precision, therefore, I use the terms dual curse or dual curse of Ham only when blackness is believed to be a part or a consequence of Noah's curse. If, on the other hand, Ham or Canaan was considered to be black before Noah's curse was uttered, or if it is not clear when blackness entered the story, the term curse of Ham alone will be used. This usage differs from that in some modern scholarship, where dual curse is used as equivalent of curse of Ham. That is, the combination of blackness and servitude, without differentiation as to whether blackness preceded Noah's curse or resulted from it. Plan of the book. I begin this study by pointing to the confusion in modern scholarship between an ancient rabbinic etiology of black skin and the biblical etiology of slavery. This leads to an examination and construction and deconstruction of the curse of Ham into two constituent etiologies of slavery and black skin, as in chapter 1. I then reconstruct the curse by examining how, when, and why a story of black origins was grafted onto the biblical story of slavery's origins. Etiologies of dark skin are found in several different cultures, some constructed around biblical figures. I examine these etiologies, that's in chapter 2 to 4, as well as a tradition that Canaan was the ancestor of blacks. That's chapter 5, showing how and why one of these etiologies evolved into Noah's dual curse of blackness and servitude. That's in chapter 6. The how I described shows how the different forms of the curse evolved as an interpretation of the biblical story. The why explains how historical and social forces gave birth to the different variations of the curse, finally resulting in the dual form, reflecting not only an association of blackness with servitude, but a disparagement of black skin itself. The evolution of the dual form of curse against this historical background is traced from its origin in the Near East to Christian Europe. That's in chapters 7 and 8, and from there to America. That's in chapter 9. Eventually, the dual curse of Ham became a much relied upon etiology, explaining the origin of African skin color, irrespective of slavery, replacing other etiologies as the cause of blackness. This resulted in the confusion and conflation of the rabbinic etiology of black skin and the biblical etiology of slavery, which returns to us in many initial discussions at the beginning of the book. I show how the confusion of modern scholars between two etiologies has its beginning in the 16th century. That's in chapter 10. Having seen how the curse was eventually used to explain African skin color, irrespective of slavery, I then look at other dark-skinned peoples to whom the curse was applied. That's in chapter 11. The penultimate chapter explores the curse within the conceptual context of the meaning of blackness. A concluding chapter summarizes the results of the study. The work is supplemented with 3 appendices and 5 exercises. The appendices list occurrences of the curse of Ham in Europe and American sources, and the related curse of Ham in both Europe and America. The first excursus is concerned with the question of whether in the rabbinic etiology of blackness, Ham was said to have had sex with a dog, as is alleged by some. The second explicates a difficult passage in the history of the Muslim historian Tabari, d.923, dealing with the curse. The third examines the claims of some that Canaan was black or the ancestor of blacks. The fourth explores the use of the term Cushite in medieval Jewish literature to refer to Egyptians or Arabs. Finally, the fifth discusses a much quoted passage in the Church Father Origen, who appears to subscribe to the belief in the curse of Ham.